Okay, so ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling a couple of pretty big legal stories making the rounds.
Sounds good.
First up, we're going to try to untangle this whole Trump sentencing thing.
Right.
We checked out this really interesting discussion on YouTube, The Ring of Fire, to kind of get a feel for all the different perspectives and what it could mean.
Yeah.
And then we're going to switch gears and look back at an older but equally important case involving HSBC, the banking giant, and some pretty serious accusations about them being tied to financing terrorism.
Wow.
So our goal today is to, cut through all the noise and give you the key takeaways from these sources so you can really understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, from that Ring of Fire commentary, you're going to hear some pretty strong opinions and legal analysis about the Trump sentencing.
Yeah.
And then we've got all these stark details of the accusations against HSBC. It's fascinating and honestly a bit unsettling to look at these different corners of our legal and financial worlds.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's just jump right into this Trump sentencing.
Okay.
Watching that Ring of Fire discussion, the first reactions were pretty intense.
Yeah.
One commentator even suggested that the judge's main goal might have been to get a felony conviction before Trump could potentially run for president again.
Oh, wow.
When you were listening to those initial reactions, what stood out to you the most?
It's really interesting how differently the commentators interpreted what the judge was trying to do. You've got one side saying it was politically motivated to get that felony.
Yeah.
And then you've got another side pointing to the judge's own words, hinting he might not even give a punishment.
Really?
Yeah. And this really shows you how subjective it can be to interpret legal actions.
Right.
And how much our own biases can shape those interpretations.
Yeah.
Even among legal experts, you see these differences.
Absolutely. And, it didn't take long for that speculation to turn into questioning the judge's competence and potential bias. The folks on the Ring of Fire definitely didn't hold back. One even called the judge a dope.
Wow.
And really went after his evidentiary and procedural rulings, suggesting those could be grounds for an appeal.
Oh, interesting.
They brought up specific examples of evidence that was allowed in and what they thought should have been kept out.
This brings up a really crucial point about any trial, the rules of evidence and procedure.
Right.
This commentator clearly believes the judge messed up big time in how he applied these rules.
Yeah.
And that these mistakes could be challenged in a higher court. When you hear such strong opinions about evidentiary rulings, it usually means there's a fundamental disagreement about what information is relevant and legally okay to consider when building a case.
Right. Right.
These are the kinds of things that appellate courts will scrutinize.
And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, the whole recusal argument because of the appearance of impropriety.
Yeah, it's a big one.
They really zeroed in on that financial connection between Schiff and the judge's daughter's PR firm,
right,
which they say went from $4 million to $12 million.
Wow, that's a lot.
The argument there, if I'm understanding this correctly, is that just having that financial link creates the perception of bias, whether or not the judge was actually biased.
You've got it. You've hit on a really crucial concept here. Public trust in the legal system.
Yeah.
That principle of appearance of impropriety is meant to protect that trust.
Right.
Even if the judge acted completely ethically and wasn't actually biased, the fact that there's this huge financial connection between someone closely tied to the politics of the case and the judge's family, it naturally makes people question whether things are impartial.
Yeah, of course.
It's all about maintaining confidence that the process is fair for everyone.
It is important for us to remember, though, that, and this was mentioned in the Ring of Fire discussion, that the judge actually sought guidance from a judicial panel about potential conflicts before going ahead with the case.
Oh, yeah, that's an important detail. That adds another layer for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
The fact that the judge went ahead and asked for guidance shows he was aware of potential conflicts.
Right.
And was willing to have them reviewed.
Yeah.
That panel's decision not to recommend recusal, well, that would likely be considered by an appeals court. Although, as we said, that appearance of impropriety argument could still be brought up separately.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and focus on the charges themselves.
Okay.
The Ring of Fire commentators spent a lot of time discussing whether it was right to elevate what could have been a misdemeanor to a felony by connecting it to an attempt to influence the 2016 election. This seems to be a major point of contention for them.
Yeah, this is where those specific legal requirements become really important.
Right.
To bump a misdemeanor up to a felony, you often have to prove a clear and direct link to another more serious crime.
Okay.
In this case, they're arguing that the misdemeanor was done with the intent of committing or covering up that other crime, trying to sway the presidential election.
Right.
Whether the prosecution actually showed enough evidence to establish that link, well, that's likely to be a key question if there's an appeal.
And speaking of appeals, the Ring of Fire folks don't exactly hold back on their predictions.
Oh, really?
They seem pretty convinced that this case is DOA, dead on arrival.
Wow.
And will be overturned quickly regardless of the sentence.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, it is.
It's important to remember that those kinds of pronouncements often reflect a specific legal or political viewpoint.
Right.
While we can't know for sure what an appeals court will do, the concerns they raised about the evidence rulings, potential bias, and the basis for the felony charges, those could all be grounds for review. But it's also worth remembering that appellate courts usually give some weight to the trial court's decisions.
Right.
So it's not always a guaranteed reversal.
The whole concept of nobody's above the law also came up in their discussion.
Yeah, that's a big one.
One commentator questioned if this was the right case to really test that principle.
Interesting.
They suggested maybe there were other stronger cases involving Trump.
What do you think about that?
I think it's an interesting point. The idea that nobody's above the law is, fundamental to our justice system.
Absolutely.
But deciding which cases to go after and how to prosecute them can be really complicated.
Yeah, it's not black and white.
This commentator's point that there might have been better cases to test that principle suggests that the strength of the evidence and the legal basis for the charges can be really different from case to case.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They even brought up a different case, a civil fraud case brought by Letitia James.
Oh, right. I remember that one.
One of the commentators thought that was a stronger case and mentioned that indictments were actually written, but then they were dropped.
Wow, so they were ready to go with it.
Yeah, it seems like it.
That definitely adds another layer of complexity.
It does. It reminds us that there can be multiple investigations and potential legal actions happening all at once.
Right.
And the reason some cases move forward while others don't can be very different.
Yeah.
Things like evidence, legal strategies, and just the choices made by prosecutors.
That's a lot of factors.
The fact that those indictments were written but not used in that fraud case, well, that definitely raises more questions about how those decisions are made.
Definitely.
One of the more critical things the Ring of Fire people brought up was about Trump's lawyers.
Right.
They didn't seem to think very highly of them.
Oh, really?
And suggested that the quality of his legal team might seriously affect the outcome of these cases.
Interesting.
They even brought up the E. Jean Carroll defamation case as an example.
Right.
Where they felt like bad legal advice might have led to that huge judgment against him.
This is such an important part of any legal case.
Yeah.
The quality of your lawyer can make a big difference in the end.
Absolutely.
Good lawyers can make strong arguments, challenge evidence from the other side, and navigate all those complex procedures.
Right.
The fact that these commentators were so critical suggests they think Trump's lawyers might have messed up in ways that could have been avoided with more experienced or skilled lawyers.
Right.
And by bringing up the Carroll case, they're giving a specific example where a different legal strategy might have gotten a better result.
Okay, so lastly, the Ring of Fire folks expressed concern that the judge's actions might make people think the judiciary isn't apolitical anymore.
Yeah, that's a big worry.
This seems to be a major concern for them.
It makes sense. That concern goes straight to the heart of keeping public trust in our system.
Right.
For people to have faith in the judiciary, they need to see it as impartial. And that decisions are based on the law, not politics.
Absolutely.
If people start thinking judges are acting politically, it erodes that trust and the legitimacy of the whole legal system.
Exactly.
That's a huge concern, regardless of what happens with the case in the end.
Okay, so let's shift gears pretty significantly now and look at a completely different legal matter.
Okay.
The accusations against HSBC, that big banking giant, and their alleged ties to terrorist financing.
Right.
The main accusation, as we're seeing in our sources, is that HSBC allegedly allowed dirty money to flow through their branches all over the world.
Wow.
And that this included money potentially going to groups like Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda.
That's serious.
These are some incredibly serious allegations.
Yeah, incredibly serious. It suggests that this major financial institution, knowingly, or at least carelessly, allowed money to move through their system that could support terrorist activities.
Right.
The scale of this alleged operation, spanning across all these global branches, really highlights the potential impact something like this could have on a global level.
And the timeline they mention is pretty significant, too. Allegations that HSBC knew about this for a whole decade.
A decade?
That suggests a prolonged period of either serious negligence or even intentionally ignoring what was happening within their own institution.
You're absolutely right. If these allegations are true, a decade of awareness would mean a systemic failure within HSBC. They didn't put in place and enforce proper anti-money laundering controls.
Right.
And they didn't take action when suspicious activity was flagged.
Yeah.
This raises huge questions about corporate responsibility and how effective oversight is within the global financial industry.
The methods they allegedly used to move this money are also pretty disturbing.
Yeah, what did they do?
There's mention of masking transactions to hide the connection between the funds and these illegal activities.
So trying to cover their tracks.
It sounds like a deliberate attempt to avoid being detected.
Yeah, that's classic money laundering.
Right.
Using these techniques to mask transactions is super common in money laundering schemes. By obscuring the paper trail and making it really hard to trace where the money came from and where it went.
Yeah.
They're trying to create plausible deniability so these illegal activities can continue unnoticed.
Right.
This really highlights the ongoing struggle regulatory bodies face.
Yeah.
Trying to keep up with the ever-evolving tricks used by people who are trying to move illegal funds around the world.
Now, the consequences for HSBC, which included a $1.9 billion fine, are described as being just a drop in the bucket compared to their total profits.
Oh, wow.
This obviously raises the question of whether the punishment actually fits the crime.
That's a common criticism when it comes to penalties against huge financial institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, while $1.9 billion sounds like a lot of money, when you compare it to what a major bank makes in a year,
right,
the argument is often made that these fines aren't enough to deter them. And they don't reflect how serious the wrongdoing was, especially when it involves national security.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if financial penalties alone are enough to change behavior at that level.
One of the most striking things for a lot of people is the lack of individual accountability.
Yeah, that's always frustrating.
The fact that no CEOs or top bankers went to prison despite these allegations and the possible connection to deaths is a huge point of frustration and disbelief.
It's understandable why people are upset.
Yep.
It's tough to hold individuals at the top of big corporations criminally responsible.
Yeah.
Often it leads to settlements where the company pays a fine, but the people who might have known about or even directed the illegal activities face no personal consequences.
Right.
It really makes you think about whether our legal system can actually hold individuals accountable for corporate wrongdoing.
Yeah.
Or if it's just focused on punishing the entity itself.
The commentator's perspective is really clear here, a feeling of frustration and disbelief that these seemingly legitimate institutions can get away with such serious actions and only face what seem like minor consequences.
It's a sense of injustice.
Yeah.
And it's totally understandable. When institutions that are supposed to be pillars of the financial system are accused of aiding terrorism, and the main outcome is just financial penalties for the company.
Yeah.
It creates this perception that there's a double standard.
Right.
And that people with power and influence aren't held to the same standards as everyone else.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, we've gone through some really complex and divided opinions surrounding the Trump sentencing.
Right.
Looking at concerns about judicial bias, the specific charges, and what might happen with an appeal.
And we contrasted that with the accusations against HSBC.
Exactly.
For allegedly helping finance terrorism over a long period of time, and the fallout from that.
Right.
Or maybe lack of fallout when it comes to individual accountability.
Yeah, and we set out to give you the key insights from these sources.
I did.
And I think we've definitely shed some light on the complexities within these two very different but equally important legal matters.
Absolutely. Both of these cases, in their own way, touch upon some really fundamental aspects of our legal system.
Yeah.
How justice is applied to powerful people and institutions. The potential role of politics in legal proceedings.
Right.
And whether people operating at the highest levels of government and finance are truly held accountable.
Considering these two cases, one very recent and politically charged, the other further in the past, but with lasting implications, what does it tell you about how justice and accountability are applied across different spheres of power and influence?
Right. It's a big question.
Is there a consistent standard? And if not, what does that mean for our society?
Yeah, a lot to think about.
It's definitely something to ponder as you process this information. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me.